morning. Well, it's a beautiful September day, 1st of September today, and I thought I'd do a end of August walk round the allotment, but not a normal tour. I just wanted to show you the things that I think I've learned, things I might do differently next time, a sort of lessons learned. So let's have a look round and I'll share with you my thoughts. What's noticeable over the last couple of days is that the leaves on the squash and the courgettes have just started to wane a little, and the plants look like the cold is having an impact on them. And this year the courgettes have not been hugely prolific. There's a couple of big plants, but I'm beginning to think that this mound arrangement is not ideal, and I don't know whether I'll get over the winter period with sufficient good weather to make a change here, but I'm beginning to think that trying to put a surround around this might be beneficial, give the soil a bit more depth, and see if we can get more prolific courgettes in a bed here. They certainly grow well in the deeper soil, but as you go up the bed, it's noticeable how the more shallow soil impacts their growth. So maybe a change here next year, we'll see. So the purple sprouting broccoli are doing well, and of course one big lesson I've learned this year is that I've got clubroot, and I've decided that whatever brassicas I plant in the plot, wherever that might be, I'm going to use lime. And I know that in this particular raised bed I've not had much produce, and I think that's because there's white rot in here as well, and therefore the big lesson I've learned this year is lime for brassicas. And not everybody will have that need, but once you've got white rot and club root, these are diseases that are very hard to get rid of. And white rot occurred in my garlic, not so much in this bed, which I've now got turnips growing in, but when I had the garlic here, there definitely was a fair amount of white rot. So I'm going to move the garlic away from this area and see if I can get a good crop next year. The crop this year was fine, but it definitely wouldn't have lasted a lot longer before the bulbs were badly affected. Parsnips look bigger than ever, and probably the best parsnips I've grown, and the proof will be when I take them out of the ground, but just looking in on them, they're forming really well, and the foliage is fantastic. They were all grown in seeds in toilet rolls and brought on and put out into the beds, and that was successful, and I will definitely be doing that again. My runner beans have been a real episode this year, and as far as growth is concerned and the cane arrangement, this has been perfect. They've worked really well. But of course, the winds that we had resulted in them coming down twice. And that's unnecessary hassle. And I've got to think about what I do next time. I think I need to have some serious strength in the canes. Maybe some scaffolding poles at one each end. And ideally, rather than have them in this plane, I could do with them in that plane, because that's where the prevailing wind always seems to head, and of course this just takes the brunt of that wind. So big lesson learnt here is more strength and orientation, and then hopefully next year the winds, which inevitably come, will hopefully not damage the crop. I'm going to be pulling my onions soon because the leaves are starting to lean over, and I don't want them to succumb to white rot, which I know is in this bed because it affected these shallots. But these larger onions, Ryan's Burger, the winter keeping onion, and Elsa Craig, are looking just fantastic. And of course I grew those from seed, kicking off in December, and I'm going to do exactly the same again this year because onions from seed definitely work better for me than onions from sets, and I haven't had a single onion bolt, which is fantastic. So more of the same there, I believe. I planted this kale quite late on. As you can see, it looks absolutely fantastic. Very little damage to the leaves from slugs or pests, and I tend to use kale in the winter, so I've learned that I can plant it a bit later, and this shady bed certainly works well for it. So this will last us now through, I would think till February, March, maybe even April. But I'll be planting kale a little bit later on in the season because it seems to do really well. The jury's out on sprouts. These sprout plants look well, and I'm going to need to get some stakes in there, but they're holding up all right at the moment, and just need to make sure they don't start to lean over. So this bed seems to be quite good for the sprouts, and I'll reserve my judgment until we crop them nearer to Christmas. I followed the garlic with Swedes, and these Swedes, whilst there's a lot of leaf damage, the Swedes are formed really well, and there's a cracker in there. They of course will last through the winter months, and I put these in significantly later than these ones in this bed, and these are much closer together, and subsequently they're a little bit smaller, but they're going to be fine. So Swedes are a really successful crop for me, and I'll continue to grow them. I put an extra couple in here and they've caught up really quickly. Set my heart on growing celeriac this year and giving it plenty of attention, and these have been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to sampling those celeriac plants. But they've got a little while to go yet. They're continuing to grow well, and yeah, very, very successful. Next year I'll probably move the bed perhaps over to the far one and grow them again. What I do remember from growing the celeriac is that I tried to grow them early and I had very little germination, but I stuck at it, and it seemed if I left the sowing a little bit later, then that benefited the plants and they soon caught up. And I grew the celeriac from seed, potting them on twice to get them to a good healthy size before I planted them. So I think I'll just repeat all that. And the carrots I grew in this half barrel have been really, really good, and they're still growing on nicely now. So I'm going to do more of that. And my rotary compost bin, which was given to me, has begun to rust through and definitely won't survive the winter. So I'm going to use the bin for the pot to grow more carrots next year. This method of thinning the apples is well known. I've just not done it before, and it is working really well, and I'm hopeful for some really good eating apples on here. These apples never actually got to this red tinge before because they never got big enough, and they're going to be lovely eaters, I think. So thin your apples. You can see where really high up I was unable to get to them, and there's still some very small ones, but generally these apples are going to be great. And if they're not sweet enough for eaters, then we'll stew them, and there'll be plenty of apple pie coming from Mrs. K's kitchen. So this bean trial that I've done this year, it's been good. There's plenty of growth on these beans, and I came to the conclusion that as eating beans, i.e. the pods, there was so little difference between these beans and runner beans that runner beans are probably the best for me to grow. But I'm now allowing them to get on to maturity so that I can keep the pulses for the winter, and we'll see what that's like. But these plants have been affected by the weather and the cooler temperatures in the last few days, and so I'm going to just allow them to get to maturity, and we'll sample the pulses and try and dry some and see what they're like for the winter. There's plenty of flowers on these gigantes, so clearly going to get a lot more beans yet, but it's been an interesting trial, and I'm beginning to think that I might put the garlic in here next year because it's so far from where I had the white rot. We'll see. Strawberries were a great success this year in the polytunnel, and I took the runners a few weeks back, and you can see how under the shade of this tree they're all doing really well, and they'll be the strawberries that I use next year. What I did learn is that growing strawberries in hanging baskets in the coop was a real failure, and I won't be bothering to do that again this year. The potato crop has been fantastic, and whilst all this foliage is growing over the top of these bins now, there's still 2, 4, 6, 8 bins of potatoes here, which I'm going to be getting out shortly. But the Charlotte potatoes grown in pots are a tremendous success. The ones I grew in the polytunnel came early, and that was really nice, and then it followed up with these. So potatoes grown in pots, definitely a tick for me. The jostaberries, we made jostaberry jam and we had jostaberry tart, and we had a really good crop off these 1, 2, 3, 4 bushes. And now the leaves are yellowing and the fruit's gone, and I just need to keep on top of these because they're renowned for getting very big, and therefore I'm just going to need to make sure that I keep control of their size. The bindweed, forever growing, doesn't matter how hard I try to keep on top of it, it gets to the point at this time of year where it wins through, but it's not interrupting any of the crops, so I'll just pull that down probably in the winter months. So I'm looking forward to some good squash. I know I've got one gigantic one because it's a beaut. There's another one, nice one there, but there's quite a few squash in here, and as I say, over the last few days I've noticed that the leaves are thinning out and drying out, so unless we have a prolonged period of warmer weather, I think probably we've got what we're going to get in the way of squash, and it's all now about just the size of them, how long we can keep going and growing them on. I'm concerned that the pumpkins didn't really come to much, and I don't know whether I'm going to have any of these sugar pumpkins that we usually have, and hopefully in here somewhere there'll be one hiding, but it looks to me like it's predominantly foliage, so we'll just wait and see as it dies back what we've got. But we're certainly going to have, I would think, 6 to 8 good sized squash out of here. And lessons learned, well, definitely sow my pumpkins and squash later because they don't fare well in the early months, and you can put them out later without any great ill effects. So just a little bit later is what I learned. The Jerusalem artichokes and the horseradish have not got to the point where I harvest them yet, but what I am clear about is that these strawberries really didn't produce enough fruit to warrant maintaining them. So I'm going to have those pots out of there and think about what I could grow in a pot that would be successful. It may be that I move some potatoes up here. In the meantime, I'm going to take quite a few of those runners, and they'll help me with strawberry plants for next year. Well, the flower bed's been really pretty and good fun, and we're still getting some penstemons flowering, but mainly the calendula is over, and a number of the plants in here, including the sweet peas, are over. I've still got to let these pods mature a bit so that I've got some seed for next year. But overall it's been successful. And this raspberry, which is an autumn fruiting raspberry, tastes very different from the summer ones. I'd say a lot better actually. Not that the summer ones are bad, these have just got a much more raspberry flavour. Gorgeous. So pleased with that bush, and I think probably it'll take all of this space in good time. These pods are starting to thicken now, and we'll have the seed from those. I'm going to be pulling these out soon. The calendula have matured and now died back, and we're starting to see some brown seeds in here, which is what I want to keep for next year. Got a single solitary apple on my new apple trees here. The poppies have been really pretty. They're really sprawling, but they were good enough to have again. And we've got loads of poppy heads on here, and we'll save some of that seed, although I suspect a lot of it's gone into the soil anyway. My marigolds were really pretty, but I want to get these plants in these back beds so that they're really easy to maintain. Cosmos worked well, and the bees still continuing to enjoy it. And these, I think, are either wallflowers or antirrhinums, but they're definitely a biennial, so I'm hoping that they'll flower next year. We had very little gooseberries from these plants, but I'm really pleased how they're bushing up. They're looking much more mature now, and as they grow together, I'll end up, I think, with 2 solid rows of gooseberry bushes, and another one in there, of course, although they've taken quite a bit of damage during the wind. That one obviously broke off, but that sort of pruning doesn't really bother me. And the rhubarb, well, we've had a massive crop of rhubarb, and I think we'll probably have another crop before the summer's out or the autumn's out. But I noticed 1 or 2 of the stems now are starting to fall over and the leaves go brown. So I think we're going to be cropping fairly soon to get what's left, and we'll leave just a few leaves for the winter. Look at the bees on those cosmos. I pruned the pear tree this year, and it certainly doesn't seem to have had any negative impact. There's plenty of large fruit in here, and it's just a case now of how long they carry on growing before we crop them. Last year they never really turned a red, although there is a red blush on these. But what did happen is once we put them in the fridge, they started to soften, and then they were beautiful for eating. So definitely pears benefit from a period of cold before you eat them, and we'll perhaps go over that routine later on in the season. Dahlias did us proud this year. I'll do the same as I did last year, which is just let them die back and put a perspex cover predominantly over this metal galvanized steel water tank. They seem to winter very well as long as I cover them over. And of course this year I'm hoping to take this whole bank out, which has been a real pain as usual in terms of grass growing over the beds. and we'll get a path in here is my plan. So that's a really big winter job. The lavender that's in here is going to have to come out, and I grew new lavender from seed, which is in the flower bed, and that seems to be establishing well, so we'll keep that clipped, and that's where we'll have our supply of lavender from. Oh, we could do with smell-o-vision because it smells glorious. Cabbage so far this year has been mixed, probably because of the club root that I had, but these greyhound cabbage seem to resist the pests more than any other cabbage that I've grown here. So I'm definitely going to be growing greyhound cabbages again. Very, very good. My leeks have done well. The proof will be in the eating, which will be a little way off yet. I've got a couple that have gone to seed, but predominantly they're fine and they're thickening up nicely. And we don't seem to have had any real rust or white rot up in this bed. So it looks like we're going to have a good winter's supply of leeks. So no real change in the leek strategy. Beetroot in the polytunnel, and we've had those and made beetroot chutney from them. And this outdoor crop is really looking good now. There's some really big beetroots in there, and there's 3 varieties, and I think all the varieties have succeeded. So we're going to be cropping this fairly shortly and making a good supply of beetroot chutney for the winter months. Well, the polytunnel's been a mixed bag this year. Whilst we've had a reasonable crop of tomatoes, we definitely got blight in here, and that's not done us any favours. But more importantly than that, these smaller pots are not a great success, and I'm definitely committed to growing fewer plants in larger pots next year. At the moment in here we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 plants, and whilst these are not huge, I think that stripping the leaves in the way that I do, just to maintain some sort of control in this fairly confined space, does expose them to blight. And I think probably larger pots, smaller numbers, and less stripping of leaves might be a more successful approach. So next year, maybe 6 plants is all that I'm going to try and grow in this area in much larger pots, and see if we can get a bigger crop off of less plants. The beefsteaks I've really enjoyed growing, and they're just starting to colour up, and the one that I had yesterday that I harvested tasted absolutely fantastic. So I think I'm going to grow more beefsteaks, but I certainly don't need to grow this many. Looking at this, probably 1 in here and 1 down the end is going to be enough. Well, it was my first year growing aubergines, and it's been an out and out disaster. Plenty of flowers, decent sized plant, no fruit. And I've clearly got a lot to learn. I'm beginning to debate whether I want to make the effort next time. Given that I'm going to approach this differently with less plants, I think adding aubergines to it is probably not where I'm going to go. But we'll see. Never say never. The carrot bed has been very successful. Very low maintenance. There's only, I don't know, 1.5 dozen, 20 perhaps carrots in here. But they certainly look nice and large, and the ones that I have harvested were really tasty. So more of the same in there. I've just got to get the right balance of watering and weeding, just to make sure I get the best I can out of the soil. And I think next year I'm going to drill down a hole and add fresh compost and see if that gets them to grow deeper. We'll see. My cucumbers have come late, and I just definitely couldn't get them growing early, and maybe I just got to resign myself to they're a bit later here, but they started to form now, and I think before the autumn's out we'll have a couple of cucumbers, but not a great success. So a bit more research, work out the best thing to do. So the peppers were grown from seed starting in December, and that's been a tremendous success. And I'm going to crop these remaining peppers shortly. I mean, there's an awful lot on here, and we'll have some sauteed peppers as a meal, and then we're going to freeze the rest, which we've had great success doing in the past. And I think as far as peppers are gone, I'm going to do exactly the same again. A good supply of peppers from the middle of the summer onwards is definitely something we enjoy, and this method, growing them from seed early, seems to work really well. In here we've got a few cuttings. The sage here is a cutting and the rosemary are cuttings, but this sage is grown from seed, and these two varieties of thyme are grown from seed, and that's been really successful. And I'll probably give an awful lot of this away, but it's nice to have different varieties of thyme. This one here is getting a bit woody, so I think I'll probably have him out this year at some point, or at least cut him back. Oh, it smells fantastic. And these other varieties that I've added, this is, I think, what does it say? Thyme Herba Barona. This is a deep rose purple flower, May to July. I haven't seen it flower yet because it's a fairly young plant, but it's coming on nicely. And the coriander that I've put into the back of the bed there is starting to come through. We'll see if we get some coriander before the end of the season. The basil plants going just to see if we could get any later crop, and a couple of them have come through and we'll harvest those shortly. But most of the basil is in the freezer in cubes and will be ingredients for winter cooking, which is just fabulous and has worked really well, and we'll do more of that. And all the varieties that I grew from seed we are enjoying, so we'll probably have more of the same next year. In the meantime, still smells fabulous. So the polytunnel's looking past its best now, but it's still productive, and we'll gradually start to thin things out as they die back. And apart from the tomatoes, which have got blight, any foliage will go into the compost heap and we'll be investing in next year. So the raspberries were fantastic. We had an enormous crop. A lot of it is in the freezer, and I've got to think how I handle this space during the winter months. But what we do know is that we get the fruit on 1 year old growth, so just allowing that growth to form now before I start to think of taking out these older branches. But we know where we're going, and it's just about how to control the weed here. And I don't think I'm ever going to crack it in this space because it really is entrenched in the soil, and unless I dig it out, I don't think we're going to get rid of it. And digging it out, of course, would damage the raspberries. So I suppose the big solution is to remove all of this and replant new raspberry bushes, and that seems like a very big job. I have got a dozen or so raspberry bushes growing that I potted up last year, so maybe it's something I can think about in the long term. So there's been a lot of lessons learnt this year. It's always the way, and every year you change some things and you decide to do things slightly differently. Some of them work and some of them don't, and of course it's not always about the decisions you make. It's very often about the different weather conditions that exist in any one particular year, and there's no accounting for that. You just do what you think will be best, and you reap the benefits, and you lose some things, and that's the fun of the allotment. Enjoyed that slightly different allotment tour. It's a time of year where you can look back and decide what worked and what didn't, and make your plans for the following year. There's lots of winter work to be done and lots of winter vegetables to be harvested, but for now it's about preparing. And one of the things they've got to do shortly is start to think about the compost they're going to put on the beds. It's been in the bins working away during the summer months, and it'll soon be time to start adding it to the beds. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all. I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.